The Director of Ceremonies, Secretary for Information and Broadcasting Services, Comrade Nick Mangwana, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Honorable Ambassador Frederick Shala, Minister of State and Devolution for Harare Metropolitan Province, Honorable Comrade Charles Chiwenga, Minister of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services, Honorable Dr. Jenfan Muswere, Minister of Youth Empowerment, Honorable Tino Machakaire, the Minister of Tourism and Hospitality, Honorable Barbara Ruodzi, the Chief Secretary to the President and Cabinet, Dr. Martin Rushwaya, Chairman of the Public Service Commission, Dr. Vincent Ungwe, as represented by Dr. Choruma, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the Provincial Job Harare Province, veterans of our liberation struggle, ex-detainees, restrictees, and war collaborators, churches, civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, good morning to you all. My address to you today marks 22 years since the imposition of sanctions by Western countries, led by the United Kingdom, the European Union, and the United States of America, through the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, ZIDERA. And today is a very important day as we mark this Anti-Sanctions Day. It also coincides with our 20th annual People's Conference of the ruling party ZANU-PF. And as ZANU-PF, we will continue to say, land has been united by its people, and its people by its land, and there is no apology to that. Over the years, most of the sanctions imposed by the European Union, the United Kingdom, and most of its allies have been removed or greatly reduced. The United States of America, ZIDERA, however, remains in place as an abstruse around Zimbabwe. The sanctions include financial restrictions and illegal economic measures that alienate Zimbabwe from global supply chains and the global financial system, as well as bar capital inflows, mainly from the West. Since 2001, we estimate that Zimbabwe has lost or missed over 150 billion United States dollars through frozen assets, trade embargoes, export and investment restrictions from potential bilateral donor support, development loans, IMF and World Bank balance of payments, support, and commercial loans. This has forced our gross domestic product to contract drastically in the 2 decades that followed the imposition of these heinous and illegal sanctions. The illegal sanctions are also a direct attack on Zimbabwe's currency, which is our sovereign currency of choice. Hence, our motherland, Zimbabwe, remains subdued by the United States dollar. The United Nations is a multilateral organization that is better positioned to provide legitimacy and credence on issues of international relations. In 2021, the United Nations appointed Ms. Alena Dohan as a special rapporteur on the cohesive unilateral sanctions on Zimbabwe. She found out that, and I quote, over the last 20 years, sanctions and various forms of over-compliance with sanctions have had a subtle ripple effect on the economy of Zimbabwe. Further, they have negatively impacted on the enjoyment of fundamental human rights, including access to food, health, safe drinking water and sanitation, education and employment, unquote. The United Nations rapporteur also observed that the situation limits Zimbabwe's ability to guarantee the functioning of public institutions, delivery of service, and maintenance of essential infrastructure. To this end, this undermines the right to development of the Zimbabwean people and impedes the achievement of sustainable development goals. The sanctions, which have been repeatedly extended, do not correspond to the requirements of Article 4 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The sanctions on Zimbabwe are thus illegal, unfair, and a violation of our sovereignty and right to self-determination. The United Kingdom claims that it imposed sanctions to discourage the government of Zimbabwe and any person or entity from abusing Zimbabweans, as well as to promote the rule of law and good governance. Meanwhile, the United States claims it imposed and maintains sanctions on Zimbabwe as a favor to provide for a transition to democracy and to promote economic recovery. What kind of nonsense is that? Zimbabwe has a sovereign right to elect its own leaders and to govern itself without external interference. Nyika inovakwa nekutongwa nevene vayo. Ilizwe lakiwa libuswe ngavanikazi valo. A country is built and ruled by its own people, not foreigners, but by its own people. This is our land. Despite having a huge population in the United Kingdom, Zimbabwe does not seek to interfere with the politics and the electoral processes of the United Kingdom or the United States of America. They do their own elections, we don't interfere with them. They do their own rules, that we don't interfere with them. And so Zimbabwe do their own election and we do our own laws and nobody should interfere with us. It is also surprising how the United States seeks to promote Zimbabwe's economic recovery with an act that strangles the Zimbabwean economy and limits its participation in the global economic system. Despite the sanctions that have weakened our institutions and degraded our infrastructure, Zimbabwe has religiously held free and fair general elections every 5 years. The sanctions which seek to induce a change of government in Zimbabwe are in essence creating an unfair electoral playing field by supporting, favoring, and capacitating regime change agents against the will of Zimbabweans, but they will not succeed. The West is using democracy, human rights, and economic recovery packaged as responsibility to protect, as a cover to punish Zimbabwe for reclaiming land from colonial landlords and redistributing it to the landless majority. Zimbabwe refused to be part of Pax Britannica, and the empire, so-called empire in brackets, responded with vengeance. To these countries, the Zimbabwean experiment of reclaiming land forcibly taken away from the indigenous people should not be allowed to succeed at all costs, lest the rest of disempowered societies in the world will follow suit. We took our land. Those who want their land to be ruled by other people is their choice. But in Zimbabwe, we took our land back. Zimbabwe demands no more than equal status with the rest of the countries in the world which are enjoying full rights of self-determination as enshrined in the 1945 United Nations Charter. Our foreign policy is underpinned by the mantra, we are an enemy of none and friend to all, in which we seek win-win friendly collaborations with all countries in the world. Whilst the first 2 decades of the illegal sanctions wreaked havoc on us and devastated our economy, whose highlight was the economic collapse of 2008, Zimbabwe is learning to survive under the siege and scourge of these illegal and heinous sanctions. We have come to realize that economic growth does not come from handouts, but from using the resources endowed to us by the Almighty God. Despite the illegal sanctions, Zimbabwe in the past 5 years realized the growth that has seen our gross domestic product surge from around 20 billion United States dollars in 2018 to over 40 billion United States dollars this year. Our growth potential, however, is far greater than what we are managing now, all because of the degrading effect of the heinous sanctions. The African Union in general and the Southern African Development Community countries in particular have suffered immensely as a result of the illegal sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. The African Union and Southern African Development Community, however, have stood firm with Zimbabwe and have routinely condemned the sanctions, calling for their unconditional removal in the international fora. SADC went further and set 25 October of each year to condemn the sanctions, call for their unconditional removal, and express solidarity with Zimbabwe. The Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and other friendly countries have also stood by Zimbabwe, including helping us fight the effects of the heinous sanctions and blocking a resolution that sought to legitimize the sanctions in the United Nations Security Council. May I take this opportunity to thank all the continental and regional blocs, as well as the countries, organizations, and individuals that have stood firm with Zimbabwe on the sanctions issue. We say to them, thank you, and may you continue to support Zimbabwe until all illegal sanctions are removed from our motherland. I also call upon Zimbabweans to remain resolute and fight for the prosperity of our country despite the illegal sanctions. As I conclude, I call upon the countries that maintain sanctions on Zimbabwe to unconditionally remove them now. May God bless you. May God bless Zimbabwe. May God bless Africa. May God bless the world. I thank you.